Join the conversation with Tommy Weber. Pro and college baseball coach Tommy Weber brings you cutting-edge interviews and thought-provoking commentary in a weekly podcast dedicated to baseball, sports, current events, and the world. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and TommyWeberBaseball.com. And make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Tommy Weber Baseball. It's time to get the conversation started, so here's your host, Tommy Weber.
From the Bolt Studio on the Staten Island campus of St. John's University, I'm Tommy Weber, and this is The Conversation, brought to you and produced by our crack staff of St. John's University undergrad sport management majors. Let's give them a round of applause. This is a podcast where we have a lot of perspectives and, of course, opinions about baseball and the sports culture. My guest is a good friend of mine, Jim Koerner. Jim Koerner spent forever as a Division I coach, 10 of which he spent as a head coach, and is now currently the Director of Player Development for USA Baseball, a very, very esteemed, I guess, international organization now. And Jim has consented to come on again because, in the interest of full disclosure, after our great podcast last week, I forgot to hit record. Okay? I forgot to hit record. I'm not a detail guy. I'm not. Supposedly, that's what I have my staff around. But I can't lay the blame on anyone else. The buck stops here, all on me. But actually, I'm glad that happened in a way because it gave me a chance to digest what we talked about last week and be ready for my esteemed guest this week. Jim, welcome aboard.
Hey, Tommy. Good to see you again.
Thanks for leaving it at that, Jim.
Yeah, keep it simple.
We went over USA Baseball age groups last week and your development, how in between age groups you have these development teams, if you will, because you don't have teams at every single age group, which I think is great. I love the whole idea of what you do. Just briefly, give us an overview of the day-to-day comings and goings of a player who's in your development team.
Okay. So as you mentioned, we don't have teams at every age group. We have teams at 12, 15, 18, college, and then our pro guys. So at the in-between age groups, the 13, 14, and the 16, 17, we have development programs. So those days are all-encompassing. I guess an average day would look like breakfast around 7 a.m., on the field for skill development between 8 and 11. Skill development is going to encompass everything from group breakdowns defensively, some offensive programming hitting wise. We'll get on the machine. We'll do drill work, tee work. We'll cover base running. Pitchers will go through some mechanical work. They'll talk about how to pitch, talking about sequencing, talk about PFPs, backing up bases, all the intricacies of pitching. So complete all-encompassing development work in the morning. We will take typically about an hour lunch break, and then in the afternoon we'll break up and play games. We'll compete against each other, and depending on how many players we have at that age bracket, at the 16, 17U National Team Development Program, we have about 72 players. So we're going to have 4 teams, and we'll play a doubleheader. Team 1 will play team 2, 3 will play 4. We'll do some international tiebreakers in there at the end to put them in the situation that they might see internationally with a runner on second base. And now we got to work on the short game, talk about bunt defense, talk about executing, moving runners. We shut it down for the day, probably around 5, 6 o'clock. We head back to the hotel. We'll do a group dinner. Typically after our group dinner, we'll do some type of educational component. We have some really highly qualified coaches with us, former Major League All-Stars, World Series winners, gold medal winners. And, we kind of give the opportunity to the players to ask questions. We do some informal Q&As. We'll bring in nutritionists, mental skills coaches, strength and conditioning experts, talk about what these guys should be doing outside their time with us, and trying to give them as many resources as possible to not only help them become better players, but also prepare them for international competition and for us to win gold medals.
As I said last time we were together, that sounds to me like you're teaching kids to win.
Absolutely. No question about it.
And that brings you to my point, which is, how do you reconcile that against two dynamics that have really proliferated over that 10 to 15 year window that we're in, where we've seen a real sea change in how people perceive players should be developed. One of which is that you could probably look on hitting Twitter and social media, baseball Twitter and social media for the next week all day long and not see emphasis on winning. As a matter of fact, there is a de-emphasis on winning from people who are really smart people, who have real pedigrees in the game. They seem to have drunk that Kool-Aid where it's more about, it's about something else other than winning. And winning has now gone really far down on the priority list. The other dynamic is what I consider now a national obsession in America, because it's not the same internationally, with rest, load management, play less, be on the field less. That has, I really like Tom House. I've always liked Tom House, but Tom has now become a guy who, if you read, he almost wants you to never play and to train constantly. How do you reconcile these all-day days for a couple of weeks, probably, against those two dynamics?
That's a lot to unpack there, and we are fighting. We are fighting against different dynamics, and from just the first point you made about the facility guys and training and going down that direction. I feel like there are actually two separate dynamics, and I think we have it backwards. I think if you look at, let's say, travel baseball, I get the sense, having a son that's kind of been through it and going through it. He's 15, going to be 16. You take an age bracket. Let's say you get a player in that 8 to 12 age bracket, and I feel those guys are focused on winning. And then you get the age bracket between, let's say, 14, 17, and those guys end up being focused on showcasing. And it's almost flipped, not that a 10-year-old should be showcasing, don't get me wrong, but a 10-year-old should be developing. But the 17-year-old who still is trying to get to where he wants to be, he ends up showcasing, not so much developing from a winning and losing standpoint. And those guys end up trying to chase the exit velos and the velocities. And now you have your 10-year-old throwing 140 pitches at some travel ball tournament in some random state, and you get a kid that's being overused and abused because the coach is so focused on winning on Sunday that they forget about the development aspect. So I think we're dealing with two different dynamics here. One being the younger kid probably more focused on the winning than he should be, and then the older kid focused less on the winning and more on the development.
I agree. I think the script is flipped. I think it's more important to have free play as a child so that you develop a passion for the game, which is more important than anything that you're going to learn. If it's going to, you want to inspire kids to play a lot. That's really what it's all about. And then as you become more of a finished product, you could do some of what I call auditioning. What has happened now is the sole purpose from the time you're 13 or 14 until the time you're 16 or 17 is to audition. You are literally training indoors predominantly so that you could go and get up on stage and try to hit the high note one time by hitting a ball very far and hard, or throwing one ball really hard. And I think we have that upside down. I really do. I don't think I'm not one for showcasing anyway. We could go into a long discussion, and I can make a compelling argument for showcasing has really hurt the development of players. But it's just interesting that at the highest level with the best kids, you're spending tons and tons of time with them on the field, going over stuff that is applicable to what they're going to do on the field. I have never seen more time and energy devoted to things that in no way resemble something that you're going to do on the field than I have in the current development space. Real quick, I'm at Game 4 ALCS, and of course I'm sitting, as you know, with the players' wives, which you don't want to sit there because if there's going to be a fight, it's going to be around the players' wives because they tend to get really emotional. And I'm like you, I sit and I watch the game and I don't make a sound. I'm watching the game, and they're not. They're all over the place. Anyway, so there was a point in that game where Yuli Gurriel gets up at second and third, and they had him shifted over to pull, and I forget who the pitcher was, but he threw him like a little fat breaking ball on the upper outside part of the plate, and he just played pepper with the vacant second baseman, drove in 2 runs, and I said, in my head, I said, they're probably going to win the World Series, because if you've got a guy who understands that in that moment, that's all you have to do, and that's all you try to do, contextually, you are so far ahead of everybody else. That's a huge advantage. That's playing to win. He did not try to do damage. He didn't try to elevate, to celebrate. It was right in front of him. He was going to do everything he could to take that, and he literally he was playing pepper with the second baseman. The second baseman wasn't there. I believe that's how they took the lead, and they never looked back. And that's a perfect example, I believe, of what you're talking about, where my takeaway from that game was they just look different than the other teams.
Tommy, that's funny. I watched another playoff game last year, and I watched two teams play. It was Yankees and Indians. Yankees had a runner on third base, less than 2 outs. Infield's playing back, and I watched one of the Yankees hitters take a fastball probably an inch and a half off the outside corner. It was a ball, don't get me wrong, but I remember thinking in that moment, I'm thinking, okay, I get it. It wasn't a strike, and they teach swing at strikes, but I'm like, man, that's a really good pitch to handle to score the run. So now it put him in an even count. I don't remember exactly. It might end up being 1-1 or 2-1, but he ended up striking out on 2 breaking balls after that. So in actuality, it was the best pitch this hitter saw that at bat. And in retrospect, I'm wondering if that hitter at all considers the fact, you know what, I had an opportunity to hit a ground ball to second base right there to score that run. And now I strike out. The Indians get out of the inning. The Yankees don't score. And you waste that opportunity. So where's the balance? Where's the balance to, just buying into your process so hard that you're going to take that pitch in that situation an inch and a half off the plate, and then sacrificing for your team and hitting that ground ball so the run scores, and you ultimately have a better chance to win the game.
I believe wholeheartedly there are a lot of teams in the league who would rather be right than win. I really believe that. I really do. That because the truth of the matter is that 17 inches defines the strike zone. It doesn't define the hit zone. It simply doesn't. There is no science that could support that the only ball you could ever hit is limited to the 17 inches of the width of the plate. That's just a fallacy. So context is everything. Expand the strike zone a little bit, hittable ball, hit a ground ball to second base, now you've got an RBI. So I couldn't agree more with you about, I think there are teams, I am convinced, because if you watch enough, you see it, who are more concerned with doing it their way than they are with winning. And that's a problem. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on. I'm going to throw some stuff out at you. There are 2 third rails, in my opinion, two issues in the modern game, in the 21st century, that are completely off limits and are exempt from the skeptical interrogation and the understanding of human fallibility. One is technology. You cannot, in modern day baseball, even question the application of technology, and any issues that arise from technology's use, the answer is always more technology. The other is strength training. You start to tell guys, listen, maybe we should think twice about how much we're doing, and you will be canceled. And the only solution to what may be some issues regarding dosage and strength training is more strength training. Those are two issues. It would be the equivalent of there's too much salt in your food, so they take it back to the kitchen and they put more salt on it. In the last week, 2 Texas Tech, I believe, pitchers, an LSU kid and another Arkansas pitcher, have all been injured before the season even starts. If you look at all the hype videos and all the stuff leading up to the season beginning, you are seeing 2 things and 2 things only, or 3 things. You're seeing guys in the weight room, guys trying to throw as hard as they possibly can, and guys trying to hit the ball as far and as hard as they possibly can. I'm just wondering if a conversation needs to be had, not about legitimacy, but about dosage when it comes to 2 topics that if you even bring them up, you run the risk of being, exiled to a desert island somewhere.
Yeah, those are really interesting topics. Starting with the tech, I like technology. Technology's good. Now, I think it's advanced the game. I think there is no doubt that technology has advanced the game. I think it's advanced individuals, players to maximize their own, unlock their own potential. And it's also advanced, the way we approach the game in a lot of different areas. Now, I think we get into some, gray area with technology is the overuse or the potential of being over analytical from both a player side and a team side. I think if you give a player too much data, too much information, you're probably going to lock him up, and he's probably going to be, less of a player. So I think you got to be really careful about how you hand out that data. So I think it has to be applicable. It has to be something that can be directly applied to the benefit of either the individual or the team. I think if you're collecting data and you're using data that doesn't have any real direct, result on the outcome of an individual moment or the game, then you probably shouldn't be collecting it, or you probably shouldn't use it. Now, as far as the injuries, I go back and forth on, you talk about arm injuries and Tommy John, and I don't know if it's from the training, the throwing. I don't know if it's just guys that are predisposed to it. You take the pitcher you're talking about, Jackson Wiggins from Arkansas, Tommy John before the season, terrible news. But let's suppose this kid does half of what he did. Does this particular player just prolong the time when he gets Tommy John? Are you predisposed to, that type of injury? Is it already in your DNA? I think it's one of those areas that is really hard to unlock. And I don't know what the answer is. Is it more? Is it less? Is it in between? Or are you just designed by fate to eventually get hurt? You take a guy like Nolan Ryan, Tommy. Look at Nolan Ryan. Nolan Ryan used to throw 200 pitches a game. He did it for 20 years, and he took the ball every 5th day, every 3rd day, every 4th day. And, you wanted Nolan Ryan to pitch. He pitched, and he never got hurt. And
I'll say this, and I'll go out on a limb. I think the pitch count paranoia is a fallacy because it doesn't give context. The batting practice pitcher throws 400 pitches a day for 162 games. He never gets hurt. So it's not the amount of pitches you throw exclusively. Obviously, you don't want a kid throwing 300 pitches. That's a lot. But even that kid, that may be a one-off. He may be fine after that. None of us could predict. People get sick. You don't know really the cause. But maybe the question should be this. Never before has more time and energy and resources been spent on developing the body. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen so many guys getting hurt. Never. So what you're not doing, and let's put it into the pitching space. What you're not doing with all of this investment, you're not doing two things. You're obviously not making pitchers more durable. No one could make that argument. And what you aren't doing is enabling pitchers to pitch more. If I came up with a system where I could get your pitchers to pitch 8 innings instead of 4 or 5, which is really what we're gravitating towards. You're going to start to see starters in that 4 or 5 range soon. Because if you're down to 6, why not make it 5? If I could develop a system of arm care that enabled your pitchers to pitch 8 innings, that would be the most valuable thing that ever happened to baseball. In fact, what you're doing is spending more time on arm care, more time on preservation of guys' careers, and in fact, yielding more injuries. That's something I think where a discussion needs to be had. Why is that happening? Yet we're not having that discussion. We're just continuing. We're actually doubling down on the methods that we're using, coming up with the same results and tripling down.
Yeah. When does here's my question for it, because I don't have an answer. When does the injury actually occur? Besides that moment that the kid pitches and blows his elbow out or his shoulder, what is the breaking point at what age? To me, I go back, and we talked about a little bit earlier. I go back to the 10U travel ball tournament where you have these innings rules, not even pitch count rules. They're innings rules where you can throw a total of 6 innings on a weekend, and you have a kid throwing, 3 innings on Friday, which could be 80 pitches. And now he's eligible to be able to come back on Sunday and throw 3 more and throw another 80 pitches. So in the course of a weekend, he's throwing, 160 pitches. So, and then is that okay? Now the question is, what is he doing between Monday and Thursday to get prepared for the next time his 10-year-old travel ball coach wants him to do it again and again and again and again? So let's say the kid doesn't get hurt, and now the kid's a freshman in high school, sophomore in high school, and the wear and tear in his arm is just that much more exasperated. He's bound to break. There's going to be a breaking point for everybody, in my opinion. So I think the question is, what's the workload, like you're saying, throughout the course of this pitcher's career? And, at what point was he abused or overused or underprepared?
And I don't want to spend all day on this, but I don't have the answer. What troubles me is the lack of discussion about this. We just are blindly going about our way, assuming that what we're doing is right when the results are right in front of us. What's happening, the carnage is right in front of us. Now, what has changed? So I look at, if we're going along and all of a sudden I see this big blip, this spike in injuries. Well, what's changed? Well, I can tell you what has changed. The way pitchers look has changed. I mean, these guys look like football players now. I get it. Everybody's training. Now, that may be good, but that is a change. So I see an increase in injuries. Everybody's getting hurt. Pitchers look different to me. They do. The other thing is what we expect pitchers to do and what the goal of pitching has become has changed dramatically. It's get on the mound and throw the ball as hard as you possibly can for 1 or 2 innings. That's very different than, listen, here's the ball, you got to win the game here. Now all of a sudden that pitcher has to pitch in a way where he's preserving, where he's keeping something in the tank. He's not maxing out on every single pitch. I see kids in these facilities, and they only do one thing. They throw the ball as hard as they can, and they look at the Rapsodo. Or they hit the ball as hard as they can, and before that ball is even off the bat, they're looking back at the TV screen to see what their readings are. That has changed. That is a huge difference. So it may not have any connection at all, but to not examine and explore the possibility that there's a connection, I think is doing the player a grave injustice.
Let me ask you this question, Tommy. Have we lost the fear of Tommy John? Is there no
Yes.
longer a fear of getting Tommy John injuries because of how, proficient these surgeons are at repairing guys? Well, the mindset is, yeah, I'm going to go as hard as I can for as long as I can. If my elbow blows out, they'll fix it and I'll be back in a year. I think some of that might exist.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because that's a misinformed public, because you're rolling the dice on your entire career by doing that, because there's no guarantee that you're going to come back and be the same kid you were after every Tommy John surgery. It's not like hip replacement. It's not quite that good. And I just think that we're missing out on, if I were not a Power 5 college coach, because that's a different part of the population. They're getting the top of the food chain all the time. So it's like in the major leagues. It really doesn't apply. But if I were just a college coach in a middle major kind of school, I really firmly believe that if you had a good pitching guy who could teach guys pitching and unplugged on a periodic basis so that they weren't slaves to the Rapsodo, you could have a tremendous amount of success. Because we said this before, nobody's going to the major leagues anyway. Basically, nobody's going to the major leagues. And if you're going to go to the major leagues, you've probably shown the ability or the potential for that at a very young age, at a much younger age than anyone wants to admit, much younger age. So if you're not one of those guys, well, now how do you enjoy the game? You enjoy the game by having success. And at the mid-major college level and below, at every single other level below that, if you're throwing the ball at the requisite rate of speed, you can't throw 60 miles an hour, but you don't have to throw 95 miles an hour. You could move the ball around, change speeds, be one pitcher one inning, one pitcher the next inning, maybe change arm angles a little bit. You'll have incredible success at the college level. Yet there's none of that. It's a one-size-fits-all training modality, and that can't be good.
Yeah, I think some of the best pitchers I've had over the last several years are guys that are just 3-pitch mix guys that can locate, they can throw a changeup, they can sink a fastball, and I do believe everything works on a bell curve. I think you saw it in the 90s, pitchers like Greg Maddux and Rick Reed and these guys that could locate in any spot of the strike zone that they wanted. And now it's, power arms and power breaking balls. And, I think eventually, we'll start to see guys that, have more pitchability, and hitters are going to have to readjust to, your changeup guys and your splitter and off-speed type guys. And once they make that adjustment, you'll go back to more power arms and strikeouts and sliders. So, I do think it'll, I don't know if it'll ever level out, but I do think we'll start to see more Kyle Hendricks type guys because, guys aren't training to hit those kind of guys. So eventually, those guys might get the jump and the advantage and have a little run at the pro level. And then it'll go back to, the power arms.
I have a theory about why the power pitcher has proliferated. And I think one of the factors is when they raise the strike zone. See, I think you could widen the strike zone and you don't affect the game as much. Once you raised the strike zone, and they did, because you and I have been around long enough to remember, if that catcher caught the ball like this, that was a ball. It was basically the belt.
Yeah.
Now it's just under the letters.
Yeah.
Here's what happened, in my opinion. Because you have no frame of reference high, the high miss is greater, which is why now you see guys swinging at balls seemingly over their heads. There's no frame of reference. There's the sky. Nobody gets beat with the fastball in the dirt because the ground is your frame of reference and you recognize ball much earlier. Mm-hmm. So when you raise the strike zone, what you did is you took a lot of pitchers who otherwise would have been out of baseball 20 years ago, who were guys who couldn't get the ball down. That was the big problem with pitchers. He throws hard, but he can't get the ball down. Now what you want is that guy. You want the guy who throws really hard to the top of the strike zone. So in essence, what you've done is you've rewarded what was amiss 15 years ago and made that guy the prototypical pitcher, and that's why guys swing at pitches over their head a lot.
Yeah, and I think you see it, you could add on with that too with the lower seams, at the
Right.
college baseball went from the high seam ball to the low seam ball, which increases spin rates and further buys into the fact that you want to throw at the top of the strike zone and have big breaking balls that complement your high ride fastball. So no, I think it's a great point. The combination of the both have really altered the game to really change the way we pitch.
So I mean, you and I are a lot alike in our approach to how the game should be played and general philosophy. I think I'm open to anything. I'll try anything because I don't have all the answers. If I'm working with players, hey, somebody wants to try something, let's do it. So I'm about trial and error. And if it works for you, you want to hit off the tee, you want to hit off your brother's head, if it works for you, we do it. I don't think anything should be off the table. So what I do is I try everything. If I see a drill, I take a ball, throw it off the wall, and I see, all right, I actually try myself. Does this work? Does this work? Have we jumped the shark now with these drills that, in essence, we only have 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. So your body can only move in very, very finite ways. There are only so many permutations. What I'm starting to see, because I test these drills, are drills that make no sense to me and are so far from anything that looks like what I would be doing on a field. It's as if we've run out of stuff to make us credible. So we have to invent stuff on a monthly basis that we could post on social media and convince people this is something you should do.
I blame social media for that. I think that's, if there wasn't an outlet for people to post this stuff, nobody would be doing it, in my opinion, because in most cases, not in every case, I'm not going to kill everybody here, but it doesn't make money. People don't want simple. The simple doesn't get clicks and likes. They want the flash, they want the complicated, and what it ends up happening, and we've had this conversation before, it's not applicable to the game. And to me, and much like yourself, we need to be training in ways that directly have game success. Like if you want to do agility work as an infielder, then go do agility work. But every ladder drill we do or every cone drill we do doesn't need a ground ball at the end. Why do we have to combine? Why do we have to combine everything? To make it seem like, and I use seem very loosely, as an infield drill, or any other modality that we're using that we're trying to transfer to the game. It's let's separate the two. We want to do conditioning, let's do conditioning. We want to do agility, let's do agility. We want to do speed work, do speed work. But if you want to do infield work, let's do infield work. Let's hit ground balls. Let's move our feet and leave some of the cones out of it. But again, that's just me. Maybe I'm a little too old school, but and I also don't have social media, so I'm not trying to sell anything either, Tommy. So I think,
well, yeah, and more power to you. I agree. I think you hit the nail right on the head. If it doesn't sell, and this kind of enables me to move to my next point kind of seamlessly, because I think they're connected. I think they are connected. What we just discussed and this. It has never taken less time to go from novice to master than it has in the 21st century. I mean, I believe it helps to have played and to have played well. I don't think you have to have been a major league player. I don't have to think you have, but I think it helps to have played with a level of proficiency that enables you to approach the game without that off, like everything is not impossible because you've done it. You fielded a ground ball. It's kind of a simple thing. It's not the hardest thing in the world to do, to catch a ground ball. All right, it's kind of simple. You get your hands out, you catch it. It isn't. I think I have never seen so many guys, I'm sorry, who have an okay history in playing the game and are 2 or 3 years out of college, so they couldn't have been coaching the game for a long time, who now have, master guru status and are, you're starting to see more and more guys with that pedigree in professional baseball. These are not just guys who are hawking it on social media to try to make a buck. You now have organizations, I know for a fact, there's an organization in baseball whose minor league infield coordinator was a really bad Division III left-handed pitcher.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I do believe, and I agree with you. Do you have to have been a former major league player to be a good coach? No, I don't think you have to be, but I do believe that having game experience is important. I think it's hard to take hitting. It's hard to talk to a kid about what it feels like facing a 95 mile an hour fastball if you've never faced a 95 mile an hour fastball. Now, it's not impossible. I'm not saying you can't help that player, but it certainly is an added bonus if you have that experience and can teach it. So I do agree with you. I think that does play a role, but it doesn't have to be, the only criteria to be a good coach, because we all know there's coaches that have played at very high levels that aren't very good coaches. And
that are awful. Yes,
and
absolutely.
there's guys that haven't that are really good coaches. And I think the guys that haven't, and this is a broad statement here, and there's other factors, but I think the guys that haven't are good communicators. They're able to help a player really get into what they're feeling. They're not so much a dictatorship; it's really a collaborative effort. I think you get a coach that doesn't have high level experience, and if that type of coach starts demanding, hey, you need to do this, you need to feel this, I think that's not going to work. But I think if you get a coach that maybe hasn't played at a very high level, that can talk a player through certain feelings, certain movements, and certain adjustments, and develop that relationship and almost be a sounding board, I think that plays really, really well at any level. I think that's really what coaching is, trying to develop a relationship and a trust where you can bring the best out of whatever player you're working with.
Yeah, the old adage was that great players never made great managers, which is why Ted Williams struggled so much when he managed. He couldn't understand why you couldn't hit 370. He goes, he did it. And I want a guy who has struggled. I want a guy who has had to grind, who didn't know every year if he was going to make the club. That kind of guy usually is a great observer of the game. He's had to sit there and watch a lot because he just couldn't make it on his ability alone. I don't think, I'm sure, I think that the Ken Griffey Jr.'s of the world would be less likely to be really good managers than the backup catchers of the world.
Yeah, baseball's hard, hitting's hard, pitching's hard. It's difficult, and I think a coach has to have that perspective when going into any training environment. This is a very much a process to get better. There's no instant gratification in any type of training environment when it comes to becoming a better hitter or a better pitcher. You might have some, moments where things unlock, and those are great moments, but they're also rare. More than likely, it's a process of daily work that builds your skill level and your adaptation over a period of time. So people just need to keep that in perspective. And I do believe there are too many quick fix coaches out there. And I think you see them on social media and different platforms where, everybody's looking for the one thing. And, you get that question too, hey, what's the one thing? If you did one thing today that would make you a better player? And, my answer would always be, there is no one thing. There's never one thing. If there was one thing, everybody would be doing it. It's a lot of different little things. So Coach, to me, it's just about perspective. Coaches just need to make sure that they have that perspective when trying to develop,
I couldn't agree more. That's a great answer. I got a question. What don't you like about the game?
I love the college game. I'm trying to be different.
You're hedging. It's okay.
I love the college
It's a
game.
tough question.
I think this, and I love the college game for different reasons. Number one, I think there's more mistakes made defensively. It's not as perfect of a product and that you might see at the major league level. You're dealing with, if a major league infielder makes an error, it's like, whoa, it's such a rare occurrence. So, some of that to me plays into the excitement of the college game. I love the fact in the college game that coaches are more than willing to bunt. They're more than willing to use small ball. I talked to a college coach today. They're opening up tomorrow, and we had a conversation this morning, and he's talking about how their offense is built on the hit and run. He goes, we might hit a double, and then next guy's going to drag. He goes, we're going to do a lot of that, and I think at the college game that plays well because we're not dealing with major league third baseman. They all don't throw 95 across the infield. There's more potential for mistakes. But I think the pro game now, to me, if you talk about things that I don't, particularly like the direction, and maybe it's starting to change a little bit. And again, I'm not even so sure I like the changes, but it's a very calculated game, the pro game. They're going to tell you exactly where to position. We talked about, the one situation where with their hitter taking a pitch half an inch off the outside corner and not driving the run in because it's a ball and he doesn't want to sacrifice a less than ideal swing to score the run for the potential of hitting a double on the next pitch. That part to me bothers me a little bit because some of that team aspect seems like it's missing at times in the pro game. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that. I think there's a little bit lack of excitement. The stolen base has, been nullified from the pro game. And, maybe with the changes now, with the pickoff rules and that type of thing, it comes back a little bit. But then, the old school part of me is like, well, why do we got to change the rules to bring the excitement back to the game? We shouldn't have to do that. Back in the 80s, the stolen base was a big part of the game, and it scored more runs when you did it. So, things have changed there too. And, I just think we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole sometimes with Major League Baseball. And, the strikeouts are up, the walks are up. There seems to be less action at times. So college game to me just moves quicker. A little bit more excitement, a little bit more action.
It's more interesting.
More interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. My pushback to you would be after Bob Gibson in the year of the pitcher, they lowered the mound 5 inches. So the game has always been kind of adjusting based on where it was to try to kind of get back to center, right? It's always done that. They've made rule changes that have changed how the game is played. The other thing you mentioned is like when you were a kid and we were watching the game back in the 80s, the black player, the literal, there are the percentage of black players in Major League Baseball. I don't know when there was a time when it was lower post 1947 than it is today. And in the 70s and the 80s, when you had those huge ballparks, you had the highest concentration of black players, and these magnificent black athletes just don't choose baseball anymore for a lot of reasons that you and I can go into. But I think baseball has gotten less athletic. I think baseball's gotten more ponderous. And I think part of that is because of the absence of the great black athlete.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, I think Major League Baseball is trying to change that and make adjustments to that. There's a lot of development programs from the Breakthrough Series that they're heavily involved in. And I think USA Baseball tries to do a great job of bringing attention to that area, but there's more options. I think there's more options. I think that's a big part of it. Football and basketball do a great job of marketing their star players, and their star players are making more money. And it's also, use the word easier. It's also, easier to get to the NFL and to get to the NBA than it is to get to Major League Baseball. You've got to go through 3, sometimes 4 levels of a minor league system to be prepared to play at the big league level. Baseball's a very hard game, and that instant gratification for any athlete, black or white, just isn't always there. You have first round draft picks. Let's just compare baseball and football when it comes to first round draft picks.
Oh my God.
Every single first round draft pick in the NFL draft is going to play in the NFL. Every
Absolutely.
single one. It's 100%, unless there's an injury. There's no first round draft pick that won't play in the NFL.
And in the NBA as well.
And in the NBA as well. But you go to baseball, what is it, 50%, 40%, that actually make it to the big league. So, if you're if you're an African-American 12-year-old and you're choosing between basketball, baseball, and football, and the accessibility of each of those sports and what you see on TV, what are you picking?
Well, I also think there's another dynamic that is grossly inhibited the availability of venues for the American black kid, and that is nobody plays anymore. There's never anybody out in the street playing ever. There is no free play. Right. If I've got a basketball in my hand, I could go play basketball. I don't even need another person, and I could go play basketball, right? And if I'm into football, as long as I'm big and fast, well, in football, size and speed are the only skill you need. You will go to Alabama because that's how they pick guys. So when we obliterated free play, when we took everything and hyper-organized it, basically a generation ago, this is mid-90s when this all starts, we essentially told kids, you will never, ever play in a playground again. You will never have a stickball game on the street. You will never play any of the lead-up games that are fun for kids to play, even if they're not aspiring to be major league players. Once you did that, well, guess what? If you're an inner-city kid, how do you ever get interested in playing the game when nobody you know is playing it casually and everybody you know is going to the basketball court, as I would, and is playing hoops?
Yeah, no, that's a big part of it. Everybody's inside. We got.
It's an indoor game.
We got 3-4 training facilities in every city across the country, north and south. Kids are inside trying to throw 100.
And you coached in the Northeast. What was the most overriding, undeniable disadvantage was the weather. The weather. You can't get outside. You can't get outside. Now, kids are inside in the summertime. Kids are inside in April. You couldn't wait for the snow to thaw out and the fields to dry out. You were rushing to a field. Now, there's no anxiety about that for the modern player. He's going to be indoors anyway.
Yeah, it's you're so right. I don't know when that started to change. Probably in the last 10, 15 years, but. To have indoor facilities in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina was probably pretty rare before I got down here. So, that was the big draw. Go south, be outside.
So you're a player development guy. So if I work with a player, and I want you to grade me on this, the first thing I tell him is, listen, I don't need you to understand anything. I think we learn more by copying than we do by understanding. We're hell-bent on everybody understanding all these difficult principles, when in reality, take the guys who are the best, look at what they do, and try to do it the way they do. Now with videotape, you could break down Miguel Cabrera, you could see where you are in a certain position. More and more players are coming from Latin America. More and more. Why is it that the model for young players is not what we see young players doing in Latin America, which is going someplace, choosing upsides, and playing games somehow amongst themselves? I believe, I think I've said this to you, I could be wrong, but I think a player's development is impeded the second somebody takes him at 4 or 5 years old, takes the bat out of his hands, and starts to teach him. And then I think what happens is a period of time goes by where he's hyper instructed at a point in time when his growth is accelerating at a rate that's unprecedented for his lifetime. Kids are growing and learning fast as it could be. And then what happens is when he gets some semblance of emancipation, he's 13 or 14, he then has to try to learn to be more natural, which is what he was when he was 4 or 5 if you just left him alone a little bit. Why aren't we doing more gathering kids in one place, throwing out bats and balls, and letting them have at it?
I think you answered that question before. It doesn't make money. We have thousands of experts all over, social media. We have 4 or 5 facilities in every city, and by doing that, Tommy, eliminates the need for us, and not just specifically us, for coaches in general. Who's left for us to overcoach?
Right.
It's turned into a business in the United States, where you go to some of these other Latin countries, where it's less of a business, and it's like you said, it's more free play. Our kids are overcoached in a lot of different settings. Simple is no longer better, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We do coach the athleticism out of a lot of kids, and that's where the real intricacies of being a good coach come into play. When do you let a kid play? When do you let a kid develop and naturally mature and grow up, where you want to overcoach him at such a young age? Because here's a great example. Strength, additional strength, whether manufactured through the weight room or through just natural physical maturity, corrects a lot of mechanics. The stronger you get as you mature, swings become better,
Right.
pitching mechanics become better. You learn to
Absolutely.
control your body. So what we do, we try to coach those adjustments that would happen naturally through time. We try to coach them into a 5-year-old, coach them into a 6-year-old, which in essence, in some situations, then inhibits their athletic ability and their movement patterns. When if we just left them alone, they would naturally get better over time.
I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective of someone who always tries to see the opportunity for the player's growth. You and I both grew up in an era where coaches didn't get paid. It wasn't quid pro quo. It was a guy who had time, who devoted himself to your 15-year-old team or your 14-year-old team. Now, the reality is, and I'm a free market capitalist, and I get it, but there's a price we pay for that. There is a price we pay for that, and that price is usually in the product, and the product being the player. And I just think the whole free play idea, emancipating the player, has such potential for unlocking the player's potential that we're missing a great opportunity here, because I know a lot and you know a lot, but I don't know better all the time. I don't know better all the time.
We need to understand the difference between technique and style. And I really believe that we teach style a lot. And I think it's how people sell products. There's some, and I don't want to pick on hitting facilities, but I will, because there's some really good instructors out there. But you get some kids that go to certain hitting facilities, they all come out looking the exact same.
Absolutely.
Okay, so really, what is your preference as an instructor compared to what is really important technique wise? Because if you lined up every major league hitter, there's going to be a lot of stylistic differences. but
Absolutely.
technique-wise, they're going to do 3-4 things that are going to be
No
the
doubt.
same. So I think coaches
Amen.
just need to really have a grasp of what's really important here from a technique standpoint, and really what's just my preference because I just like the way it looks, or I'm trying to sell lessons.
We're teaching a generation how to swing, not how to hit.
Yeah, exactly, right. 100% accurate. Too much.
I try to, my pro guys, man, we're here to hit. We're not here to swing. And I want to finish with this. This notion that every swing is your A swing. I've watched the game for 1,000 years, thousands and thousands of at-bats. I see very few, even at the major leagues, A swings. You've got to battle. You've got to be able to when you're down in the count, shorten up a little bit, put the ball in play, hit a line drive. Every swing is not this stylistic swing where you pose like Ken Griffey did, like Superman. And we're trying to make that the goal of every single swing you take. That's not hitting. That is not hitting. That is swinging.
Yeah. To me, the key word is adjustability. The best hitters have adjustability. And
right. They're ready for anything.
Ready for anything. And they have the ability within their body movements and movement patterns that they can adjust to anything. So I think the best hitting coaches teach adjustability. It's decision making, it's pitch recognition, it's understanding strengths and weaknesses, it's having adjustability in your swing and being a good athlete,
Taking what you're given. I say to my hitters, let me tell you something that you don't want to do. Never let a pitcher throw a half-hearted pitch and get away with it if it's a strike. Never. That get me over stuff, you got to be ready to go from Jump Street because that may be the best pitch that you ever get. And if you don't jump on that, well, you're doing him a favor.
I agree.
You're not up there to take. You're up there to hit.
Tommy, hitters hit only two things. They hit fastballs and they hit mistakes. You don't hit good sliders. It wouldn't be a good slider if you hit a good slider. So
exactly.
Fastballs and mistakes. And the word I was looking for that I wanted to throw in there about the human element. We're missing the human element in the pro game, where the college game to me has more of that human element. And I think we're putting in rules and analytics and over, teching the pro game that we're losing out on the human element. And I think that's why kids fell in love with this game so long ago, because of that human element.
Jim, I couldn't agree more. You know the word I use? We're sterilizing the Major League game.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's very sterile.
That's right.
It's not, it's like they're trying for perfect. And perfect isn't attractive. That's why the Mona Lisa has that kind of odd look. You're really attracted to that because it's not perfect. And what's great about baseball is its lack of perfection.
That's right.
Baseball's the only game, it gives you suspense. Baseball's not an exciting game. There's not a lot of action. But what baseball does that the other games don't do is can get you on the edge of your seat for 9 innings without a lot going on. That's not happening enough in the game anymore. And I could get into a really crazy debate about the DH and the 50 years of the DH. Again, let's talk about what the DH has done on the good side, but also what it's done on the bad side. And now with the universal DH, you've kind of neutered the managers now. Strategy, substitutions, do I pinch hit? Do I double switch? That's what makes baseball fun. Baseball is never going to explain itself to you. You have to invest in baseball. It's like single malt scotch and jazz. When you first experience it, you're like, whoa, what is this? But then you start learning about it, and all of a sudden, now you're vested in it. You watch a football game for 5 minutes, you know what's going on. Basketball, you know what's going on. Baseball, It takes a lifetime to learn it. And I do believe that the game is starting to become far too sterile.
I'll throw one at you. They're going to start making pitchers wear... and I've seen them. Colleges have them too. They don't wear them in games, but they're going to start making them wear like these sensors that are going to tell the coach or somebody designated to track this during the game when they're tired. And they're going to start taking pitchers out based off of what the sensors are saying on their arm. So it's crazy.
Wow. And think about it. If you even question that in public, in the public square, you get stoned. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's something that's worthy of being questioned, really. I mean, do we really want to go there? And to what end?
Yeah.
What is the end?
What is the end? Efficiency, that's what they're going to sell, or health. They're going to sell efficiency, and they're going to sell arm health. That's what they're going to sell. This is, and maybe for right or wrong, that'll be the direction. Well, if we know based off of whatever we're putting on our arm that this guy is getting tired, his arm speed slowed down, whatever matrix they come up with, and that's going to help him stay healthier, that's what they're going to sell.
Then you better have the data to back that up, and they don't have. That's one data they don't have. They can't lay claim to any of these protocols
about arm health,
increasing the life of pitchers. No, they can't.
It's the one most unpredictable thing. We talk about that single moment in time where a kid blows his arm out, but when did that buildup occur? At what point did we get to this moment in time? That's what you can't quantify. It's impossible.
Yet we're running down that road at the the speed of gravity, for God's sakes. I mean, we are flying, accelerating to this race to the bottom of this, and there just is. The reality is, my father, God bless him, used to say, Tommy, living is hazardous to life. And if you're going to play the game at any level, you are risking injury. And the rules that I'm the most skeptical about are ones that are put in place to protect you, because there's always a heavy price you pay. And I'll leave you with this. I think we paid a very heavy price by basically taking out a middle infielder on the double play. I'm not an advocate for rolling him over or barreling him over, but you de-athleticized the second most athletic position other than center field. Those middle infielders now, you don't even have to practice getting the ball out of your glove anymore. Guys like Robinson Cano and Mazeroski and Willie Randolph and all these guys who were like magicians getting the ball out of, it doesn't really matter anymore. You could put a fat guy at second base, have him stand there, and just basically act as an intermediary between the shortstop and the third baseman.
Yeah, there's I had a guy call me up talking about USA's baseball's. It's called Pitch Smart. We have Pitch Smart rules.
Yeah, I know it.
Right. He calls me up. He goes, "Your Pitch Smart rules are wrong." He goes, "I have a team of doctors that says they need to be these levels." And it was all lower. They were all lower numbers. And I said, you know what? I got another team of doctors that says if we only throw 15 pitches a game, kid's not going to get hurt either. I said,
absolutely.
What's the end point here? Where are we going with this? And how do your doctors know more than our doctors about this? I go, let's just not pitch. Let's have a 127-man pitching staff, because we'll throw 127 pitches a game, and everybody throws one pitch.
So listen, an hour. I mean, we obviously, and I'm going to leave this as an open invitation. I know you have a really busy schedule and a lot of stuff on your plate, but if you have an idea, text me. Boom, we'll set this up. We'll talk. I've got tens and tens of.
Yeah. That's funny.
I obviously don't do this to get viral, but I do it because I think with guys like you, I think it's smart. I really mean that. I mean, it's rare that we hear a lot of smart talk about the game that isn't about an agenda, that isn't about something you're getting in return for doing it. And I think there's a big space that we all need to step into so that we can have these kinds of discussions, because I think everybody benefits.
Yeah, no, it's fun. I can't believe that was an hour. That went by fast.
All right. Jim Koerner. Thanks, Jim Koerner.